Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan and Pat back on this edition of Illinois Rising, and the field for the mayoralty of Chicago got more crowded this week. You had dopey Bill Daley enter. You got Gary Chico taking another crack at it. Queen Sugar in the process of formally moving her way in. Here's what Bill Daley had to say upon his announcement at the outset of the week. You know, he's not walking away from his name.
I'm not going to change my name. Let me go on the record, first of all. Some people like our name. Some people don't. I would hope that they would give Bill Daley the opportunity to present himself, his credentials, his background, and what he plans to do for the city.
Yeah, well, we will give you the opportunity to do that. We did in the Democrat primary against Pat Quinn in 2014, and you lasted about 8 weeks, realizing apparently after the fact that that would require campaigning outside of the Chicago city limits. So it's not the Daley name I dislike. I'm sure there are some very nice Daleys. I don't know. But it's Bill Daley I dislike because he's a hack who has coasted off of his name, never accomplishing anything in his own right in his life. He's always been a guy, put Bill Daley here, give him a title to satisfy the power structure, and yeah, he can get rich doing it, just kind of keep him out of the way. That was the story at Ameritech when he introduced Bruce Rauner to Rahm Emanuel so that everybody could get paid. That was the deal at J.P. Morgan where he wired up the parking meter deal for his brother and really for Morgan Stanley, who made out. And, that was the deal with his political sinecures too, commerce secretary, chief of staff, photoshopping him into the Situation Room during the bin Laden raid and all of the nonsense. This guy is... well, it will be interesting. You obviously understand my perspective on him. It will be interesting to see if I'm right that the appetite outside of C-suites and rent-seeking business owners in the city for another Daley is quite limited.
Yeah, I think that this has a little bit of a Democrat Jeb Bush feel to it to me, where you have the least talented of the family out there running off of latent name ID and all the things that you just referenced. And I think the days of that, Dan, I don't think they're over, but I think they're starting to come to an end. I think people are starting to stop the idea that this seat belongs to this family. The political family dynasties are less. I think people view it less that way. So I don't think that the fact that he's got this famous name is going to help him. I think there's a lot of people who have a bad taste in their mouth off of what Richie Daley did, at least in the last part of his mayorship, not in the mid-90s when things were cranking, but in the last part of it. So I don't think his name is going to help him. You can tell just from that very quick clip that he's not politically talented. He doesn't sound particularly sharp. He's just throwing his hat in the ring to see if it sticks, in my opinion. And he does this quite often, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, one of the things that he's seen people get away with is having essentially not accomplished anything and still being elected to high office. And a lot of times they don't accomplish anything, but they have these impressive titles on their CV, and that's what he's referencing when he says, look at, what I've done, I've had this post. Having a credential is not the same thing as being qualified. But I think a lot of people don't make that distinction, and a lot of candidates hope they don't make that distinction. Bill Daley continued.
We have serious problems. We've got to address the crime problem. We've got to make the city more affordable, and we've got to make it stronger economically. But this election is not about the last 8, the last 40. It's about the next 4 years.
He's prospective. He's forward-looking, and he's got his finger on the pulse of what's wrong. We've got crime. We need to eliminate it. We've got usurious tax burdens that make the city unaffordable. We've got to address that in some material way that will be determined later. We have to educate kids. We have to do everything that's good and none of the things that are bad, and that's his platform.
Yeah, and even listening to that clip even further, and I'm not saying that he's drunk. I'm sure he's not, but he sounds like it. There's no authority in what he's saying. He's running off pablum that he's done so many times. And look, this is a very crowded field. but it's not as crowded, I think, as people think. At the top, there's going to be 3 or 4 highly, known, financed competitors that he's going to have to combat, who are better politicians than he is, who have more current things on which to point to, failures in our view. So my view of Bill Daley is it's not going to go well for him.
Well, that seems like there's no kind of groundswell out of the gate, that's for certain. But let's not change a thing in 2019. Bill Daley for mayor. He's signing up some of the financier class, there's no question, who are completely unshamed by the place in which they have helped bring us in Chicago and Illinois, such that they would essentially argue that he's the least worst of the field, rather than in a race right now to maybe 20% to get to a runoff. Expand the field with somebody new that actually would have a skill sets to chart a different course, when I think even in Chicago there's an appetite for that different course.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, just what you mentioned, because you'll remember, because you ran in this primary and I was running in a different primary, where the Republican gubernatorial race in 2010 was so bifurcated or trifurcated or however many fricatids there were, that you had Bill Brady, who in my view would not have been a good governor and would not have, and that's my view. I like Bill personally, but he won, with 21% or whatever it was. So what ends up happening is, there's a real chance you get somebody in there, in this instance, who is totally unprepared for the job. Not that this is a great field. And then, to me, the field expands. I'm a Republican, but I still like Vallis. I mean, I would like people to get behind him in this field, because I feel that at least he has decency, and I think that's something that's been lacking in City Hall for a long, long time.
Well, the other thing is, how about in this field where it's a complete jump ball? I mean, here we go again, where the absence of a Republican Party really turns out to cost you a state that there's one party rule, when you have an opportunity to introduce a center-right candidate into this process. I mean, you could argue Vallis is in some respects, but in many respects he's not. You can introduce a center-right candidate and expand the parameters of discussion and consideration in the city to build for something in the future. Because if you don't do that and you just continue to cede the city, then you're going to continue to cede control of the state to the Chicago Democrat men and women of always. And how's that working out?
Well, and this is the time to do it, Dan, because like you said, in a typical environment, it'd be very difficult in the city of Chicago and sort of the political environment we're in now to draw enough vote to win the election. But when you only need to get 18, 19% for a runoff, this is your numerical opportunity. And then once that happens, you have 2 months to make your case mano a mano, for lack of a better term. And so there's an opportunity here that's almost never here, and nobody is stepping into the breach and taking us up on it.
To rebrand and reintroduce the Republican Party, too, in a place where you haven't had a center-right candidate since Don Hayter in 1987. I mean, it's an embarrassment, but, where to begin with the embarrassments of the Republican Party?